Marcus Thaddeus Coleman stood before 2,800 faces in the Moscone Center's main hall, the kind of crowd that could swallow a man's voice if he let it. Stage lights painted everything in surgical white, turning the first three rows into silhouettes. A year ago, he'd been invisible. Today, every eye tracked him like he mattered. The projection screen behind him displayed a photograph he'd nearly forgotten existed himself in a thrift store jacket standing next to James Harrington in a $1,200 suit, both men caught mid-handshake in what the media had called the tech industry's most improbable partnership. Marcus remembered that moment differently. Remembered the weight of failure still clinging to his shoulders, the taste of desperation he couldn't quite swallow down. 14 months ago, I sat in a parking lot watching the company that just rejected me fall apart through floor-to-ceiling windows. I had a choice then. Drive away with my dignity intact, or walk back into a building where I'd just been told I wasn't good enough. The audience leaned forward. Marcus had learned this part, the rhythm of revelation. Give them the hook before the context. Make them need to know how a man goes from rejected to standing on this stage. What the HR director didn't know when she dismissed me that morning was that I'd already solved this exact problem 3 years earlier. At DataCore Systems, when everyone else was running protocols that made things worse, I found the answer in 4 hours. He paused, let the numbers sink in. 4 hours when others needed days. The projection changed to a black screen with white text 14 months earlier. The apartment at 4:15 in the morning existed in shades of gray streetlight, filtering through blinds that didn't quite close. Marcus had been awake since 3:47, listening to Lily's breathing shift from smooth to ragged. The cough that woke him wasn't dramatic, just persistent enough to pull him from dreams he couldn't remember into a present he couldn't escape. Her forehead under his palm carried heat, nothing dangerous but enough to worry. 7 years old, and she trusted him completely, believed her father could fix anything because he'd never told her otherwise. The thermometer read 99.4. Borderline. The kind of number that meant maybe school, maybe home, definitely a decision he'd have to make alone. Vanessa would know exactly what to do. The thought arrived unwanted, sharp as always. 3 years since the accident, and his mind still reached for her in moments like these, still expected to hear her voice from the hallway saying something practical about fluids and rest. Instead, there was just the hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen, the distant sound of a truck on Euclid Avenue, the hollow quiet of a home missing half its foundation. The kitchen counter told its own story. Rent notice for $850 due in 9 days. Electric bill past the courtesy period. Lily's school supply list for next month items he'd been putting off. His phone on the counter showed the bank notification from yesterday, current balance, $67.32. Marcus made coffee with grounds he'd been stretching for 3 days, the brew coming out thin and bitter. 14 years of working in tech, and he'd been reduced to rationing Maxwell House, to checking his account balance before buying milk, to lying awake at 3 in the morning, doing math that never quite added up. The DataCore severance had lasted 4 months. The unemployment had lasted 2 more. Now there was just interview number 12 at TechFlow Solutions, and a prayer that this time would be different. The good luck card appeared on the table while he wasn't looking. Lily must have made it last night after he'd tucked her in, must have crept out of bed with construction paper and markers to build something she thought he needed. The front showed a crayon drawing of a man in a blue suit standing in front of a tall building, both rendered with the confident imprecision of a 7-year-old who hadn't learned to doubt her vision yet. The building scraped against a yellow sun. The man's smile was bigger than his face. Inside, in letters that wavered but never fell, she'd written, "Daddy can fix anything, love, Lily." His throat closed. She'd drawn stars around the word anything, little bursts of certainty in silver marker. He stood there holding this piece of construction papers like it was a legal document, like it proved something that mattered. Mrs. Beatrice Whitmore arrived at 7:15, exactly the way she had every morning for the past 4 months. 63 years old, with silver hair she wore in a bun, and eyes that had seen enough of the world to know when a man was drowning. She'd taught 4th grade for 37 years before retiring, had that particular gift for reading people that came from decades of watching children try to hide their troubles. She set her purse on the counter, took one look at Marcus's face. 11 tries, Marcus. Today's number 12. Her voice carried the kind of gentleness that made it harder to maintain composure. She knew the Count had been keeping track alongside him, had probably lain awake in her own apartment 2 doors down, wondering if this would be the one that stuck. His phone lit up with an email notification. The subject line was enough, RE Senior Systems Engineer position, Microdyne Corporation. He didn't need to open it to know what it said. They all said the same thing in the end, just arranged the words differently. After careful consideration, pursuing other candidates. Best of luck in your search. Interview number 11 dead before number 12 even started. I appreciate you doing this. Lily has a slight fever. If it goes over 100, there's children's Tylenol in the bathroom cabinet. Beatrice touched his arm, brief but firm. She'll be fine. You focus on showing them what you can do. The drive to TechFlow Solutions took 43 minutes through morning traffic that moved in lurches and stalls. Marcus used the time the way he'd used it for all the interviews before this one, rehearsing answers to questions he could anticipate. His '98 Honda Civic complained at every gear shift, the odometer reading 187,000 miles of slowly accumulated failure. Tell me about your experience at DataCore Systems. 8 years as a senior software engineer specializing in database architecture and system optimization. Led 3 major projects that improved processing efficiency by 34%. When the acquisition happened and they moved operations to Chicago, I chose to stay because I have a daughter in school here, friends, a life I couldn't just relocate. Why did you leave DataCore? They were acquired by a larger corporation, all operations consolidated to their Chicago headquarters. I was given the option to relocate, but I have personal commitments here that made that impossible. Personal commitments. The phrase tasted like ash. Every interview, the same dance, the same careful language, to avoid saying what they'd eventually ask anyway. Single father, 7-year-old daughter. The 2 facts that transformed every conversation from professional to suspicious. His mind wandered to patterns he'd been trying not to see. Interview after interview going well until family obligations came up. Watch the hiring manager's expression shift like a door closing. The conversation ending minutes later with polite promises that never materialized. Not this time. This time he'd deflect, redirect, find a way to answer without giving them the ammunition to shoot him down. He needed this job. Lily needed this job. The rent notice and the bank balance and the slow erosion of everything he'd built demanded this job work out. TechFlow Solutions rose 12 stories against a gray October sky, all glass and steel, and the kind of aggressive modernity that tech companies use to announce their relevance. The lobby through the windows looked like every other tech lobby Marcus had seen: polished floors and minimalist furniture, and young people in expensive casual clothes moving with the certainty of employment. Lily's card was in his jacket pocket. He touched it through the fabric, let his daughter's certainty be a talisman against his own doubt. The lobby was exactly as cold as it looked from outside. A receptionist, who couldn't have been more than 25, directed him to the 11th floor with the kind of professional smile that never reached actual warmth. The elevator played music that was trying not to be music, ambient, sound shaped into something inoffensive. Marcus checked his reflection in the brushed steel doors. 10-year-old suit that still looked professional if you didn't look too close. Tie his brother had given him for a birthday he couldn't remember. Shoes he'd polished last night until the cracks didn't show. The conference room had windows overlooking the city, the kind of view that was designed to impress. Marcus sat in a leather chair that was too comfortable, laid his folder on a table that was too clean. His resume sat inside 5 pages that documented a career that should have meant something. The door opened. Victoria Sutherland entered, first 44 years old, and carrying herself like someone who'd learned early that authority was something you projected rather than earned. Behind her came Robert Ashford, technical lead, late 40s, with the kind of programmer's posture that spoke of decades spent hunched over keyboards. Last was Margaret Flynn, operations 50s, expression neutral in a way that felt practiced. They arranged themselves across the table. Victoria opened a portfolio, clicked a pen. Robert set down a laptop. Margaret folded her hands. "Mr. Coleman, thank you for coming in." Victoria's voice was professional in the way voices became when they'd said the same words 1,000 times. "I've reviewed your materials and I have to say your background at DataCore is impressive." The next 40 minutes went better than Marcus had any right to expect. They asked about system architecture and he answered. They posed theoretical problems and he solved them. Robert's questions grew increasingly technical, and Marcus met everyone drawing on 8 years of experience dealing with challenges these people had only read about. He explained the database corruption crisis at DataCore, how he'd traced a catastrophic cascade failure to a single corrupted verification file, how he'd solved in 4 hours what the entire team had been wrestling with for 2 days. Robert leaned forward. "How did you identify the source when everyone else missed it?" Most engineers look for complex solutions to complex problems. Sometimes the answer is simpler than we want to believe. I checked the backup validation protocols, noticed the timestamp was wrong. The process had failed but logged success. Everything built on that false foundation was corrupted. Once I bypassed the automated validation and forced a manual rebuild, the restore worked perfectly. Margaret made a note. That's impressive diagnostic work. 43 minutes in, and Marcus let himself believe this might actually work. Then Victoria's expression shifted, subtle but unmistakable. Mr. Coleman, I see there's a 6-month gap in your employment history. Can you explain that? The question landed like it always did, innocent on the surface and loaded underneath. Marcus had practiced this answer, refined it across a dozen rejections. Datacore was acquired by a larger corporation. They decided to consolidate all operations to their Chicago headquarters. I was given the option to relocate, and you chose not to. I have commitments here that made relocation impossible. Victoria's pen paused on her notepad. What kind of commitments? Aging parents? Other family obligations. The room got smaller. Marcus felt the walls closing in, felt the familiar weight of having to choose between honesty and having a chance. I'm a single father. My daughter is 7 years old. Her school, her friends, the stability of her life, I couldn't ask her to give all that up. 43 minutes of building credibility evaporated in the silence that followed. Victoria's expression didn't change, but something behind her eyes did. Robert shifted in his seat. Margaret's pen stopped moving. I see. Victoria set down her pen with precision. This position requires significant availability. Mr. Coleman, we're a fast-moving company with demanding project timelines. There are weekend work requirements during product launches. Emergency calls at 2 in the morning when systems fail. How would you handle those demands with a young child at home? I have very reliable childcare. My neighbor is a retired teacher available 24/7. Lily's enrolled in an after-school program that runs until 6. I've managed emergency situations before without issue. At Datacore, I never missed a deadline, never failed to respond when the system needed me. Robert leaned back, arms crossed. But Datacore didn't have our demands. We're growing rapidly. We need people who can be fully present when the company needs them. I understand that. My availability has never been the issue. My work at Datacore speaks for itself. Victoria picked up her pen again, not to write, but to hold. Mr. Coleman, I appreciate your honesty about your situation. But there are inherent limitations when one has singular parental responsibility. We need someone who can be fully present without external distractions. Someone whose focus isn't divided. The words landed soft but hit hard. External distractions, divided focus. Marcus had sat through enough of these conversations to recognize the translation. With respect, Miss Sutherland, I noticed you didn't question my competence during the technical portion of this interview. My answers were solid. My experience directly addresses your needs. The only variable that changed was mentioning my daughter. Victoria's expression cooled. Mr. Coleman, there's no need to become defensive. We're simply being thorough in our evaluation. I'm not defensive. I'm observing a pattern. If I were married with a stay-at-home spouse managing my household, would my availability be under this kind of scrutiny? Margaret shifted. Mr. Coleman, we ask all candidates about their ability to meet our demanding schedule. You asked me about distractions and divided focus. Those aren't schedule questions. The air in the room changed. Victoria set her pen down completely. Robert's jaw tightened. Margaret looked at her notepad like it contained answers to questions no one was asking. Mr. Coleman, I think we've covered what we need to cover. We have several more candidates to interview. We'll be in touch regarding next steps. Marcus stood, gathered his folder with hands that wanted to shake but didn't. This is the 11th interview where everything was fine until I mentioned being a father. I am one of the best systems engineers you're going to interview. My track record proves that. You're going to pass on me because I have a 7-year-old daughter who needs her father. Victoria stood as well. Mr. Coleman, I understand you're frustrated, but this interview is concluded. He nodded, turned, walked out of conference room B with his dignity held together by force of will. The elevator ride down felt longer than the ride up. Outside, the November air bit at exposed skin. His car waited in the parking lot, looking as defeated as he felt. Marcus sat behind the wheel and didn't start the engine. Pulled out his phone. No messages from Beatrice, which meant Lily was fine. Just him and the slow realization that he had no idea what came next. 9 days until rent was due. A daughter who believed her father could fix anything. The phone buzzed. Text from Beatrice. Lily wanted me to tell you she knows you got the job because you're the smartest daddy in the world. Marcus stared at the message until his vision blurred. Another buzz. Email from a company he'd applied to 3 weeks ago. Dear Mr. Coleman, after careful consideration of all applicants, we have decided to move forward with other candidates whose experience more closely aligns with our current needs. Interview number 13 rejected before it even happened. Marcus let out a breath that had been trapped in his chest since the interview ended. He should start the car, should drive home and figure out how to tell Lily that Daddy didn't get this job either. Instead, he sat, and through the windshield, through the floor-to-ceiling windows of TechFlow Solutions, he watched something he didn't immediately understand. People were running, not walking quickly or moving with purpose, but actually running through the lobby. A man in an expensive suit had to be someone important, based on the way others moved around him. Stood in the center, gesturing sharply, mouth moving, in what looked like shouting. Even though Marcus couldn't hear him through the glass, more people converged. Computer monitors were being wheeled across the floor. Someone sprinted past carrying equipment cases. The expensive suit man grabbed another employee by the shoulder, clearly demanding something. Marcus's engineer brain kicked in, automatically trained after 8 years to recognize the signatures of technical crisis. This wasn't a fire alarm or building evacuation. This was system failure, the kind that made executives panic and sent technical staff scrambling. A van pulled into the parking lot near the entrance emergency response vehicle. 2 men in matching polo shirts jumped out carrying heavy equipment cases and ran toward the entrance. Marcus could see the company logo now, DataBridge Emergency Response. Another van arrived 30 seconds later. Different company, same urgency. TechFlow was calling in multiple consultant teams, which meant whatever had gone wrong was bad enough that their internal staff couldn't handle it. He should leave. This wasn't his problem. These were the same people who'd spent 43 minutes evaluating his competence before deciding a 7-year-old daughter made him unreliable. But the engineer in him couldn't stop analyzing. Database issue had to be. Through the windows, he could see error messages on screens, the distinctive red warnings of system cascades. The crisis inside TechFlow was getting worse. More consultants arriving. More equipment being hauled in. The expensive suit man now surrounded by what had to be his executive team, all of them focused on a laptop someone had set up on a lobby table. He recognized the pattern because he'd seen it before. At DataCore in 2022, the entire engineering team had worked for 2 days on a database corruption that was bringing the company to its knees. Marcus had fixed it in 4 hours by finding a single corrupted validation file that no one else thought to check. This looked exactly like that. Lily's voice in his memory. When people need help, you help them. That's what heroes do. He'd said that to her once back when she'd asked why he always stopped to help Mrs. Whitmore with her groceries. Now his 7-year-old daughter's philosophy sat in his chest like an accusation. But helping people wasn't contingent on whether they deserved it. Marcus looked at the good luck card still sitting on his passenger seat. Daddy can fix anything. Lily had drawn it believing he'd come home successful. Instead, he was going to come home unemployed again with rent due in 9 days. Unless he opened his car door. This was stupid. They'd rejected him. Walking back in there would be humiliating at best. But Lily believed her father could fix anything, and maybe proving that one time would matter more than all the rejections. Marcus pocketed the card and walked toward the TechFlow entrance, having no idea if this was the best decision of his life or the worst. The lobby was chaos. 50 people minimum, all moving with the frantic energy of a crisis spiraling beyond control. Computer equipment covered every available surface. Consultants in company-branded shirts huddled around monitors. The expensive suit man stood near the elevators, face red tie loosened, looking like someone watching his empire burn. Marcus made it 3 steps inside before a hand caught his arm. Sir, the building's in lockdown. Only authorized personnel and approved consultants. The security guard was maybe 40 black name badge reading T. Washington. I interviewed here this morning. I think I can help with your database issue. Washington's expression didn't change. We got 50 consultants working on it right now, sir. Marcus gestured at the chaos behind the guard. Does that look under control to you? Washington glanced back, and in that momentary hesitation, Marcus saw doubt flicker across his face. Still, he shook his head. I have my orders. No unauthorized access during the crisis. Then call someone who can authorize me. Tell them Marcus Coleman is here, the candidate who interviewed this morning, and I've dealt with this exact failure before. Washington studied him for a long moment. Finally, he reached for his radio. Control, this is Washington at main entrance. I have a gentleman here, says he interviewed this morning, claims he can help with the system problem. Name is Marcus Coleman. Static, then a voice. Hold him there, I'll check with Miss Sutherland. Marcus's stomach dropped. The weight felt eternal. Around them, the crisis continued. Someone shouted about backup corruption. The expensive suit man threw his phone at a wall hard enough that it shattered. Washington's radio crackled. Peterson, Ms. Sutherland says the gentleman should leave the premises. Marcus felt the door closing. Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to wait. The voice came from behind them. Marcus turned to see a young man in his mid-20s, TechFlow badge hanging from his neck, running toward them with desperate energy. Wait, hold on. You're Marcus Coleman. The guy who interviewed this morning. Marcus nodded, not sure where this was going. I'm Donovan Hayes, Junior Systems Engineer. I read your case study on cascade prevention. You published in Systems Architecture Quarterly 3 years ago. You read that? It's cited in 3 textbooks. You solved a backup corruption cascade in 4 hours that Donovan stopped. Looked past Marcus at the chaos in the lobby, back at Marcus, that looks exactly like what's happening here. Donovan pulled out his phone, dialed without hesitation. Mr. Harrington, sir, this is Donovan Hayes from Systems. The candidate from this morning, Marcus Coleman. He's here. He published the definitive paper on database cascade failures. He's dealt with this exact scenario before. A pause. Donovan's eyes widened. Yes, sir. Right away. He lowered the phone. Mr. Harrington wants you in the server room immediately. Washington stepped aside. Marcus followed Donovan into the chaos weaving between consultants and equipment heading for the elevators. I can't believe you're here. Your data core paper fundamentally changed how we think about validation protocols. When I saw the cascade starting this morning, I thought if only we had someone who understood this, and now you're actually here. The doors opened into a server room that looked like a war zone. Equipment everywhere, 6 different consultant teams clustered around various stations, all of them talking over each other. And in the center, the expensive suit man. Up close, he was older than Marcus had thought, early 50s, exhausted. His shirt was soaked through with sweat. His hands shook slightly. Next to him stood Victoria Sutherland, and the look she gave Marcus could have frozen water. Mr. Harrington, Victoria's voice was ice. I must object to having unauthorized personnel in our server room during a crisis. The expensive suit man, Harrington, the CEO, turned to Marcus. You're Coleman. The one Victoria interviewed this morning? Yes, sir, and you've seen this before. Marcus looked past him at the monitors showing cascading errors. At Data Core 2022, different system, but same failure pattern. Automated backup restoration, spreading corruption instead of fixing it. A man in a consultant's polo shirt, late 50s, stepped forward. Sir, we've attempted 14 different restore protocols. This gentleman can't possibly show me your backup integrity logs. Not the results, the validation process logs. Harrington gestured at Donovan. Pull them up. 30 seconds of typing. A screen full of data. Marcus scanned it, found what he was looking for in less than a minute. There. He pointed. 3:47 a.m. this morning, your validation check completed in 51 seconds. So, the consultant's tone dripped condescension. Standard validation takes 11 to 13 minutes. This didn't run properly. Your validation protocols are corrupted. Every restore attempt trusts poison verification files. You're not fixing the problem, you're spreading it deeper. The room went quiet. Harrington leaned forward. Can you fix it? I need complete system shutdown for 3 minutes. If I'm wrong, you lose 3 minutes. If I'm right, you're back online in under 5. Harrington looked at the expensive consultant. What do you recommend, sir? Shutting down without comprehensive analysis could cause permanent data loss. Harrington cut him off. Mr. Coleman, you have 3 minutes. Do it. Victoria moved like she was going to object. Harrington gave her a look that stopped the words in her throat. Donovan was already pulling up access screens. Marcus sat at the terminal. 8 years of experience focused into one problem. Behind him, 50 people watching consultants who'd spent 4 hours failing, now forced to watch an unemployed engineer either save the day or make everything worse. His fingers moved across the keyboard. Shut down automated restore protocols. Navigate to the validation directory buried 3 layers deep. The corrupted files sat there innocuous, marked as clean by checks that had never properly run. Someone gasped. You can't just delete core validation files. Marcus deleted them anyway. Force the system to regenerate from the archived baseline. Watch the progress bar crawl while everyone held their breath. 2 minutes 47 seconds. 2:58. 3:12. New validation protocols generated clean. Marcus initiated database restoration. 3 minutes 42 seconds after he'd started, the screens turned green. System online. Database accessible. Errors cleared. The server room erupted. Someone screamed in relief. Donovan grabbed Marcus's shoulder. Consultants who'd been failing for 4 hours stood frozen. Harrington stared at the screens like they'd performed a miracle. 3 minutes 42 seconds. Mr. Coleman, I don't even know what to say. Marcus stood. You hired good consultants. They'd have found it eventually. In days. Harrington's voice was rough. We had an investor presentation in 90 minutes. If this system was still down, we'd have lost the biggest contract in company history. You just saved TechFlow Solutions. From across the room, Victoria watched her expression unreadable. Mr. Coleman, Harrington was saying, I want to hire you, right now. Senior systems architect reporting directly to me. $110,000 annual salary. $12,000 signing bonus available immediately. Full benefits for you and your daughter. Start Monday if you're available. The world tilted. This morning he'd been rejected. 90 minutes ago he'd been in his car wondering how to tell Lily he'd failed again. Now the CEO was offering him more money than he'd made at Datacore. I accept. Good. Now I need you in the investor presentation. You're the reason we still have a company to present. The conference room for the investor presentation was massive. Floor-to-ceiling windows. A table that could seat 20. 3 people in expensive suits waiting representing enough money to build or destroy companies. Harrington did introductions. The lead investor, silver-haired man named Thomas Whitfield, studied Marcus with sharp eyes. Mr. Coleman James tells us you resolved their system crisis in under 4 minutes. 3 minutes, 42 seconds. But your consultant teams had already done most of the diagnostic work. I just saw the pattern they were missing. Modest. Whitfield smiled. I appreciate that. I understand you were interviewing here this morning. Yes, sir. And the position was initially declined. HR had concerns, Harrington said carefully. I've since overridden that decision. What kind of concerns? Marcus could have stayed quiet. But something about this man's directness made him choose honesty. I'm a single father, Mr. Whitfield. 7-year-old daughter. They felt it posed availability concerns. The room got very quiet. Whitfield leaned back, expression shifting. I see. Long pause. I'm a widower myself, Mr. Coleman. My wife died 17 years ago. I raised 2 children alone while building 3 companies. Another pause. Your daughter is fortunate to have a father who prioritizes her. That's not a liability. That's character. He turned to Harrington. James, I'm approving the $250 million investment round. Mr. Coleman's presence on your team gives me confidence that you're building something sustainable. The meeting continued, but Marcus barely tracked it. His phone buzzed. Text from Beatrice Lilly asking when you're coming home with good news. He typed back, tell her daddy has amazing news, home by 6. The meeting ended with handshakes and signed term sheets. Harrington pulled Marcus aside. Monday morning, 9 a.m. We'll get your onboarding started. He paused. Marcus, I need to be honest. Victoria raised serious objections to this hire. She's been with TechFlow for 16 years. I'm overriding her judgment based on what I saw today, but that creates tension. I understand. She has power here. Making an enemy of her could make your life difficult. Marcus thought about the rent notice, Lily's absolute faith that her father could fix anything. Mr. Harrington, I spent 6 months watching my daughter believe in me, while the world told me I wasn't good enough. If keeping this job means dealing with difficult politics, I'll take that over, explaining to a 7-year-old why we're being evicted. Harrington smiled. Monday, 9 a.m. Welcome to TechFlow. The drive home took the same 43 minutes, but the world looked different. Same streets, same traffic, same struggling Honda. But Marcus Coleman was employed again. He pulled into the apartment building lot at 5:47. Mrs. Whitmore's door opened before he reached his own. Well, I got the job. Her hands flew to her mouth. Oh, Marcus. Oh, thank God. It's more than a job. They're paying me $110,000 a year, $12,000 signing bonus, full benefits. I start Monday. Beatrice pulled him into a hug. Lily's going to be so proud. Inside his apartment, Lily was at the kitchen table drawing. She looked up when the door opened, gap-toothed smile breaking across her face. Daddy, did you get the job? Marcus knelt down. I got the job, sweetheart. She screamed and launched herself at him. I knew it. I knew you would. He held her, this little person who believed in him so completely, and felt something tight in his chest finally release. Daddy, can we get ice cream to celebrate? Absolutely, they went. Marcus let Lily get 2 scoops, sat across from her, watching her talk about school and her best friend Sarah and the science project she wanted to do about volcanoes. Normal things? When they got home, Lily made him read 3 chapters of her current book, then negotiated for 1 more, then finally agreed to sleep. Marcus tucked her in, watched her eyes close with the complete trust of a child who believed her father had everything under control. Back in the living room, he pulled out his phone, opened his bank app. Monday morning, that would start changing. 1 week until the signing bonus hit. 2 weeks until first paycheck. Rent would get paid. Bills would get caught up. He sat on his couch in an apartment he could now afford to keep and let himself feel the full weight of what had happened. Rejected at 9 a.m., employed by 3 p.m. Lily's good luck card sat on the coffee table. Daddy can fix anything. She'd been right, not in the way she'd imagined, but through seeing a crisis and choosing to help even though he'd been rejected. The rent notice was still on the counter. He picked it up, looked at the number that had been terrorizing him. $850. In 1 week, he'd have $12,000. Marcus turned off the lights, checked Lily one more time, and went to bed with hope as a tangible thing for the first time in half a year, not knowing that the crisis was just beginning, that Victoria Sutherland had plans he couldn't see, that his daughter would face something worse than financial instability, that the next 3 weeks would test him in ways that had nothing to do with databases and everything to do with dignity. But tonight, none of that had happened yet. Tonight, there was just a father and daughter sleeping peacefully, both believing tomorrow would be better than today. Monday morning arrived with the weight of new beginnings. Marcus stood outside TechFlow Solutions at 8:45, earlier than necessary, but unable to stay home any longer. The building looked different now that he belonged inside it. Still glass and steel, still aggressively modern, but no longer a fortress keeping him out. The security desk recognized him. Washington nodded as Marcus approached, something like respect in the gesture. "Mr. Coleman, your badge is ready. Floor 11, they're expecting you." The badge felt substantial in his handproof of employment rendered in plastic and magnetic strip. Marcus Coleman, Senior Systems Architect. The title that had seemed impossible Friday now hung from a lanyard around his neck. Donovan Hayes was waiting when the elevator doors opened. The young engineer's enthusiasm hadn't dimmed over the weekend. "Everyone's talking about Friday. Word got around that you fixed in 4 minutes what cost us $500,000 in consultant fees. You're basically a legend." Marcus followed Donovan down a corridor lined with offices. "I got lucky identifying the problem quickly." Luck doesn't explain publishing the definitive paper on Cascade failures. Donovan stopped outside a corner office with windows overlooking the city. "This is you. Harrington wanted you to have proper space." The office was 3 times larger than Marcus's cubicle at Datacore had been. Desk credenza, 2 guest chairs, a view that stretched to Lake Erie on clear days. Someone had already set up his computer, left a welcome packet on the desk. "Team meeting at 10 to introduce you to everyone. Until then, get settled. System access should be live." Marcus sat in the leather chair and logged into the network with credentials that had been created over the weekend. His access level was higher than expected CTO-level permissions that opened nearly every system in the company. Harrington clearly wanted him to have the tools to prevent another crisis. The welcome packet contained standard orientation materials, org charts, company policies. Buried in the middle was a printed email from Victoria Sutherland to Harrington dated Saturday morning. Someone had included it deliberately, though Marcus couldn't guess who. The email was clinical in tone, but venomous in content. Victoria outlined her concerns about hiring decisions made under crisis conditions without proper vetting, mentioned liability issues with granting high-level access to new employees, suggested a probationary period with limited permissions. The last paragraph made her position crystal clear. "I must formally register my objection to this hire. Mr. Coleman may possess technical skills, but his personal circumstances present ongoing risk to company operations." Marcus read it twice. So this was how it would be. Victoria had lost the battle Friday, but the war was just beginning. His phone buzzed. Text from Beatrice had dropped Lily at school. She told everyone her daddy is a systems architect now. Teacher looked impressed. The image of Lily proudly announcing his new job made him smile despite the email. That's what mattered, not Victoria's objections or office politics, but being able to provide for his daughter. The team meeting assembled in a conference room on the 11th floor. 15 engineers, mix of ages and backgrounds, all watching Marcus with varying degrees of curiosity. Harrington made introductions, kept it brief. Marcus Coleman joins us as Senior Systems Architect after demonstrating expertise that saved this company Friday. He'll be working directly with me on infrastructure integrity and crisis prevention. Make him feel welcome. The engineers introduced themselves. Most seemed genuinely pleased to have him. A few looked skeptical, probably wondering if Friday had been a fluke. One older engineer, Peter Drummond, current CTO, looked actively hostile. After the meeting, Drummond cornered Marcus in the hallway. His voice was low enough that others couldn't hear. "I've been CTO here for 11 years. Built most of the systems you fixed Friday. Harrington bringing you in at this level, giving you access that took me years to earn, doesn't sit well. I'm not here to step on anyone's territory. Territory gets stepped on when someone jumps the line. Drummond walked away without waiting for a response. Donovan appeared at Marcus's elbow. Don't worry about Peter. He's been phoning it in for 3 years. Everyone knows it. Harrington knows it. That's probably why you're really here. The morning passed in a blur of system reviews and technical documentation. Marcus absorbed everything he could about TechFlow's architecture, identifying vulnerabilities, noting places where Friday's crisis could have been prevented with better protocols. At 2:30, his desk phone rang. Harrington's assistant requesting he come to the 12th floor. The CEO's office was twice the size of Marcus's, decorated with the kind of minimalist expense that came from having money long enough to stop announcing it. Harrington gestured to a chair. How's your first day educational? Your systems are solid, but there are gaps in your validation protocols that make cascades possible. That's why you're here. Harrington pulled up something on his computer, turned the screen so Marcus could see. Security logs from Friday night. Someone tried to access our HR database from an external IP address. Attempt was blocked by our firewall. Marcus leaned forward. When 11:47 p.m. Friday, 2 hours after you left the building. The attempt specifically targeted employee records from 2019 to present. Who has access to HR databases internally? Just Victoria and 2 other HR staff. But this came from outside. The IP trace is interesting. Harrington pulled up another screen. It resolves to a residential address in Cleveland Heights, Victoria Sutherland's home. The implications hung in the air between them. Why would your HR director try to access employee records from home on a Friday night? That's what I'm asking you to help me find out. Harrington's expression was grim. I'm giving you access to investigate this quietly. If Victoria is doing something inappropriate, I need to know before it becomes a legal problem. You want me to investigate your HR director on my first day? I want you to use those CTO-level permissions to review what happened and report back. Victoria's been with this company 16 years. If there's nothing wrong, we confirm that and move on. If there's something, I need to know what it is. Marcus thought about the email Victoria had sent Saturday objecting to his hire, about the way her expression had changed during Friday's interview when he mentioned being a single father, about having a child he desperately needed and a boss asking him to dig into something that could make a powerful enemy. I'll review the logs. Back in his office, Marcus pulled up the security audit trail. The attempted access Friday night was sophisticated, using credentials that suggested someone with internal knowledge of the system. The firewall had blocked it because the access was coming from outside the building during non-business hours, triggering automatic security protocols. But what was Victoria looking for? Marcus dug deeper, reviewing not just Friday night, but months of access patterns. HR databases were supposed to be accessed only during business hours, except for emergencies. Victoria's access history showed something different. Multiple late-night logins over the past 6 years, all of them targeting the same file directory, rejected candidate records. His phone rang. The elementary school. Mr. Coleman, this is Principal Garrett. There's been an incident involving Lily. She's not hurt, but we need you to come in. The drive to Lincoln Elementary took 12 minutes that felt like 12 hours. Marcus kept telling himself Lily was fine. The principal had said she wasn't hurt, but his mind generated worst-case scenarios anyway. Principal Garrett met him in the main office, a woman in her 50s with the exhausted patience of someone who dealt with 30 years of elementary school drama. Lily's in my office. Before you go in, I need to explain what happened. The story emerged in pieces. During social studies, Mrs. Delilah Hawthorne had asked students to share what their parents did for work. Lily had proudly announced that her daddy was a systems architect at TechFlow Solutions, that he fixed computers and saved companies. Mrs. Hawthorne had responded by asking Lily if she was sure about that, if maybe she was exaggerating to make herself feel special. Had said in front of the entire class that it was important to be truthful rather than making up stories about their families. Lily had insisted she was telling the truth. Mrs. Hawthorne had suggested that some children from certain backgrounds felt pressure to make their families seem more important than they really were. Marcus felt ice form in his chest. What does certain backgrounds mean exactly? Principal Garrett looked uncomfortable. Mrs. Hawthorne insists she didn't mean anything racial. Just that Lily has been creative in the past about some things. Creative how she told the class last month that her mother was an astronaut. Obviously, that wasn't true. My wife died 3 years ago. Lily sometimes imagines what her mother would be doing if she were alive. That's grief, not dishonesty. I understand, Mr. Coleman. But you can see how a teacher might be concerned about a pattern of exaggeration. Is there a pattern, or is there one instance of a child processing grief followed by a completely true statement that a teacher decided not to believe Principal Garrett had no answer for that. Marcus walked into her office where Lily sat in a chair that was too big for her face, streaked with tears. He knelt down, pulled her into a hug. "Hey, baby, I heard what happened. She said I was lying, Daddy. In front of everyone. Said kids like me make things up. I know, sweetheart, but I wasn't lying. You are a systems architect. You do save companies. You told the absolute truth, and I'm proud of you for that." Lily pulled back, looked at him with eyes too serious for 7 years old. Why didn't she believe me? Marcus had no answer that a child could understand. How do you explain to a 7-year-old that sometimes people make assumptions based on race, that being black meant some people would doubt her truth, that this was just the beginning of a lifetime of having to prove herself? Some people make quick decisions about what's true without checking their facts first. That's their mistake, not yours. Mrs. Hawthorne appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Coleman, I want to apologize for the misunderstanding." Marcus stood slowly. "What specifically are you apologizing for?" The teacher blinked. "I may have been too quick to question Lily's statement. You told my daughter in front of her classmates that children from certain backgrounds feel pressure to exaggerate about their families." "What backgrounds? I didn't mean." "You meant something. What backgrounds were you referring to?" Mrs. Hawthorne's face flushed. "I was trying to teach the importance of honesty. By calling a black child a liar when she told the truth." Marcus kept his voice level but let the words land hard. "My daughter has never lied to you. My wife's death is documented. My employment is verifiable. You made an assumption based on nothing except your own bias." Principal Garrett stepped forward. "Mr. Coleman, I'm sure we can resolve this professionally." Professionally would have been Mrs. Hawthorne checking facts before humiliating a student. Marcus pulled out his phone, showed his TechFlow badge photo. "Systems architect, $110,000 salary, started today." Everything Lily said was completely accurate. Mrs. Hawthorne looked at the phone, at Lily, back at Marcus. Her mouth worked, but no words came. "I expect a public apology to Lily in front of her class tomorrow. Not a vague statement about misunderstandings, a clear acknowledgement that she told the truth and you were wrong." He took Lily's hand, walked out of the office without waiting for a response. His daughter was quiet until they reached the car. "Daddy, are you mad at Mrs. Hawthorne? I'm disappointed that an adult didn't take the time to verify facts before making assumptions." "What's assumptions?" "When people decide something is true without checking first. Sometimes assumptions are based on how someone looks or where they come from instead of on actual facts." Lily was quiet for a long moment. "Is it because we're black?" The question hit like a physical blow. 7 years old and already understanding that her race shaped how people saw her. Marcus wanted to lie to protect her from this truth a little longer. But Lily deserved honesty. Sometimes, yes, not everyone, but some people make assumptions about black families that they wouldn't make about white families. That's not fair. No, baby, it's not fair at all. They drove in silence. Marcus's mind was splitting into parallel tracks. One track processing what had happened to Lily, planning how to address it with the school, working through the fury and frustration of watching his daughter face racism at 7 years old. The other track still grinding on Victoria's attempted database access, on the pattern of late-night logins, on whatever secret she was protecting. At home, Beatrice had dinner waiting, took one look at their faces and knew something had gone wrong. Marcus gave her the short version while Lily went to her room. Beatrice's expression cycled through shock to anger, to a weary recognition that made Marcus think she'd seen this before. That poor baby. First day you're employed and she has to deal with this. It won't be the last time. Beatrice touched his arm. "No, but how you handle it teaches her how to handle it herself. You stood up for her today. That matters." After dinner, Marcus sat with Lily while she did homework, both of them pretending everything was normal. She went to bed early, exhausted from crying. Marcus tucked her in, watched her fall asleep, and felt the familiar helplessness of being unable to protect his child from the world. His laptop was still in his bag. He pulled it out, logged into TechFlow's VPN, started digging deeper into Victoria's access patterns. 6 years of late-night logins. Always the same directory, rejected candidate files. Marcus pulled the metadata, looking for patterns in what she'd been viewing. What he found made his blood run cold. 43 candidates rejected over 6 years. Victoria had accessed each file multiple times, often late at night after business hours. Marcus cross-referenced the names with demographic data that HR kept for EEO reporting. 38 of the 43 rejected candidates were black or Hispanic. 31 had mentioned being single parents during their interviews. The pattern was too consistent to be coincidence. Marcus pulled up interview notes, found the same coded language repeated across dozens of files. Commitment concerns, availability questions, cultural fit issues. And overwhelmingly, these notes appeared for candidates of color who'd mentioned family obligations. He ran the numbers against hired candidates from the same period. White candidates who mentioned being single parents during interviews, 12 applied, 11 hired. Black candidates who mentioned being single parents, 17 applied, 0 hired. The statistics painted a picture that was legally actionable. Disparate impact discrimination, the kind that got companies sued and HR directors fired. Marcus's phone buzzed. Email from Donovan saw. "You leave early. Everything okay?" He typed back. "Family situation, all handled. Thanks for checking." Donovan's response came immediately. "If you need anything, let me know. Friday, you saved my job. Least I can do is have your back." Marcus stared at that message. "Friday, you saved my job. What did that mean?" He called Donovan's cell. The young engineer answered on the first ring. "What did you mean about Friday saving your job?" Donovan hesitated. "Can we talk in person tomorrow?" "This isn't a phone conversation." The next morning, Marcus arrived at 7, an hour before normal start time. Donovan was already there, looking like he hadn't slept well. They walked to a coffee shop 3 blocks from the office. Donovan waited until they were seated in a corner booth before speaking. "3 years ago, my brother Terrell applied here. MIT computer science degree, 3.9 GPA, internship at Google. Perfect candidate for the junior developer position." Victoria interviewed him. Marcus had a sinking feeling where this was going. 8-minute interview. Terrell timed it. First 5 minutes were standard questions. Then Victoria asked about his personal life. He mentioned having 2 kids, being a single dad. The interview ended at 3 minutes later. Rejection email arrived before he got home. And Friday, Terrell's now a senior engineer at Google, making $185,000. "But Friday, when you walked out of that interview, when I heard you'd been rejected, I knew why." Donovan's hands were shaking slightly. "I've been watching Victoria for 3 years. Noticed the pattern, but didn't know what to do about it. You're the first person who got hired despite her saying no. Why didn't you report it to who HR? Victoria runs HR. Harrington. He rubber stamps her decisions. I'm a junior engineer with a black brother she rejected. Who's going to believe me without evidence? What if we get evidence?" Donovan looked up sharply. "You found something." Marcus pulled out his laptop, showed the access logs, the demographic analysis, the interview duration statistics. Watched Donovan's eyes widen as the scope became clear. "This isn't just wrong, this is federal discrimination." Title 7. Maybe Section 1981. How do you know employment law? I've been researching for 3 years, trying to figure out if what I was seeing was illegal or just unfair. Turns out it's both. They sat in silence while the implications settled. Marcus thought about Lily at school, about Mrs. Hawthorne's assumptions, about the way systems of bias repeated at every level. We need more than data. We need testimony from the people she rejected. You want to contact them? If we're going to do this, we do it right. Document everything. Build a case that can't be dismissed. Donovan's expression shifted to something like hope. You're really going to take this on? Victoria's been here 16 years. She has connections on the board. My daughter was called a liar yesterday by her teacher for telling the truth about my job. I'm tired of watching people make assumptions based on race and family status. If we don't fight this, it just keeps happening. Over the next week, Marcus and Donovan worked carefully. Reached out to 8 rejected candidates from Victoria's files, explained what they'd found, asked if anyone would be willing to share their experience. 5 responded immediately. Their stories were variations on a theme. Strong interviews until family status came up. Sudden shift in tone. Quick endings. Identical rejection reasons. Cultural fit concerns. Gerald Washington, 39, rejected in 2021. Everything was great for 40 minutes. She asked if I had family. I mentioned my 2 daughters. Interview ended 6 minutes later. She said I clearly had divided priorities. Jamal Brooks, 44, rejected in 2020. I asked if being a single father would be a problem. She said not directly, but that the company needed people who could be fully committed. The way she said committed made it clear what she meant. Marcus documented everything. Built a database tracking interview duration, before and after family mention. Average time from hello to family question, 41.7 minutes. Average time from family mention to interview ends 6.3 minutes. For white candidates, the numbers were reversed. Thursday afternoon, Harrington called Marcus to his office. The CEO looked like he'd aged a decade in a week. I got an email from Victoria's attorney. She's alleging harassment, says you and Donovan Hayes have been contacting rejected candidates to build a case against her. She's threatening legal action if it continues. Marcus had expected this. We contacted 8 people, asked if they'd be willing to share their interview experience. All communication was professional. None of it constitutes harassment. Victoria claims you're accessing confidential HR files without authorization. You gave me CTO-level access and asked me to investigate Friday's security breach. The files I accessed were directly relevant to that investigation. Harrington rubbed his temples. Marcus, I appreciate thoroughness, but this is becoming a problem. Victoria's threatening to go to the board. Some members have worked with her for over a decade. What if what we found is bigger than office politics? Marcus pulled up his laptop, showed Harrington the analysis. 43 rejections over 6 years, demographic breakdown, interview duration statistics, the coded language pattern. Everything laid out in charts and graphs that made the discrimination impossible to dismiss. Harrington stared at the screen for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. If this is accurate, we could be looking at a federal lawsuit. Class action, the company could be liable for millions. Or you could fix it now, acknowledge the problem, make it right, implement real changes. By throwing Victoria under the bus, by holding her accountable. Marcus kept his voice level. Mr. Harrington, 8 days ago you told me I wasn't good enough because I have a daughter. Friday you saw that judgment was wrong. How many other qualified people did this company lose because of similar bias? Harrington closed the laptop. I need time to think about this. In the meantime, stop contacting rejected candidates. That's a direct order. Marcus nodded, but his mind was already working on the next step. If Harrington wouldn't act, there were other options. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the Department of Justice. Whistleblower protections existed for situations exactly like this. That evening, he got home to find Lily unusually quiet. Beatrice met him at the door with a concerned expression. Mrs. Hawthorne apologized to the class today. But something else happened. Lily was in her room drawing the way she always did when processing difficult emotions. Marcus sat on her bed. Hey, baby, Mrs. Whitmore said something happened at school. Lily didn't look up from her drawing. Mrs. Hawthorne said she was sorry for not believing me. Said she should have checked facts first. That's good, right? Then Sarah's mom came to pick Sarah up. I heard her tell Mrs. Hawthorne that maybe she was right the first time. That some parents teach their kids to play victim. Marcus felt rage ignite in his chest. Sarah's mom said that I wasn't supposed to hear, but I did. He pulled Lily into a hug, felt her small body shake with tears she'd been holding in all day. Baby, listen to me. Some people are going to doubt you your whole life. Not because of anything you did, but because of who you are, and that's wrong. But you know what matters. Lily shook her head against his chest. The truth matters. You told the truth. I'm proud of you for that. Don't ever let other people's doubts make you question what you know. But it hurts when they don't believe me. I know. It hurts me too. But we don't stop telling the truth just because it's hard. We keep being honest, keep being excellent, keep proving them wrong one day at a time. After Lily fell asleep, Marcus sat in his living room with his laptop reviewing the evidence he'd compiled. 43 families affected by Victoria's bias. How many careers derailed? How many children watched their parents get rejected for reasons they couldn't control? His phone rang. Unknown number. Marcus almost didn't answer. Mr. Coleman, this is Thomas Whitfield. We met briefly at the investor meeting Friday. Marcus sat up straighter. Mr. Whitfield, what can I do for you? I heard through some channels that you've been doing research into TechFlow's hiring practices. Channels being Donovan Hayes, whose brother works for a company I have a board seat on. I've been reviewing some irregularities at Harrington's request. Irregularities? Whitfield's tone suggested he knew exactly what kind. Mr. Coleman, I'm going to be direct. I've been in this industry 40 years. I've seen every kind of discrimination there is. If you found something actionable, I want to know about it. With respect, why? Because I invested $250 million in a company I thought was ethical. If there's systemic bias in hiring, that's a material fact I should have been told about. Whitfield paused. Also, I don't like being lied to, and I don't like companies that throw away talent because of prejudice. Marcus made a decision. Sent Whitfield the complete analysis via encrypted email while they were still on the phone. 10 minutes of silence while Whitfield reviewed. Then a low whistle. 43 rejections. Statistically significant disparate impact. Coded language documentation. This is Title VII grounds for federal action. Harrington asked me to stop investigating. Of course he did. This creates massive liability. Easier to sweep it under the rug than deal with it. Whitfield's voice hardened. But I'm on the board, and I don't accept discrimination as a cost of doing business. I'm calling an emergency board meeting for Monday. You'll present these findings. Mr. Whitfield Victoria has 16 years of institutional power. She'll have lawyers. So will you. I'll arrange representation from the firm we keep on retainer. They specialize in employment law. I could lose my job over this. You could lose it anyway if Harrington decides you're more trouble than you're worth. At least this way you go down swinging. Whitfield paused. Mr. Coleman, I'm a widower, raised 2 kids alone while building 3 companies. I know exactly what it costs to be a single parent in the business world. If you've documented systematic discrimination against people like us, we have a moral obligation to address it. Monday morning, 9 a.m., board meeting. I'll send you the formal invitation tonight. Marcus hung up feeling like he'd just jumped off a cliff. There was no going back now. Monday, he'd stand in front of TechFlow's board and accuse their HR director of systematic discrimination. Either they'd act or they'd destroy him to protect themselves. Friday, Harrington called him in again. The CEO looked furious. You went over my head to Whitfield. He called me. I answered his questions. You sent him confidential HR data without authorization. Data you gave me access to when you asked me to investigate. I documented what I found. If that creates discomfort, maybe the problem isn't the documentation. Harrington's jaw worked. Marcus, I don't think you understand the position you're putting yourself in. Victoria has connections throughout this industry. If you make an enemy of her, you could be unemployable. I was already unemployable. 12 interviews in 6 months, all rejected. The only reason I'm sitting here now is because I solved a crisis that 50 consultants couldn't fix. My competence got me hired despite Victoria's objections. Maybe the company should examine why her objections keep blocking qualified candidates. Monday, 9 a.m. Harrington's voice was tight. The board wants to hear your findings. I suggest you prepare very carefully, because if you can't prove these allegations, you'll be the one facing consequences. Marcus spent the weekend preparing his presentation. Charts showing demographic breakdowns, interview duration analysis, direct quotes from rejected candidates, legal precedents for disparate impact claims, everything documented, sourced, defensible. Lily noticed something was different. Saturday afternoon, while they were at the park, she looked up at him with those 2 perceptive eyes. Daddy, are you worried about work a little bit? Sometimes doing the right thing means taking risks. Like when I told the truth to Mrs. Hawthorne, even though she didn't believe me. Exactly like that. Lily held his hand tighter. Beatrice says brave doesn't mean not scared. Brave means doing it even when you are scared. Mrs. Whitmore is very smart. She also said you're the bravest person she knows, because you keep fighting even when things are hard. Marcus pulled his daughter close. You know what makes me brave? You do. Knowing I need to build a world where you don't have to fight as hard as I did. That's worth any risk. Sunday evening, Donovan called. His voice was tight with anxiety. Victoria knows about Monday. She sent an email to the entire board claiming you're a disgruntled employee, manufacturing evidence out of spite for being initially rejected. Did she address any of the actual evidence? Not a word. Just attacked your credibility and motivations. Classic misdirection. When you can't dispute facts, attack the person presenting them. Marcus, if this goes wrong, I'm implicated too. I helped you contact those candidates. You can still back out. Say I pressured you that you didn't understand what we were doing. Donovan was quiet for a moment. Terrell asked me what I was going to do. I told him I was going to stand up and tell the truth. He said that's the brother he remembers. I'm not backing out. Monday morning arrived with the weight of consequences. Marcus dressed in his best suit, the one he'd been saving for special occasions. Picked out a tie Vanessa had given him years ago. Looked at himself in the mirror and saw a man who'd been rejected 12 times hired once and was now betting everything that the truth mattered more than institutional power. Lily gave him a new card at breakfast. This one showed 2 stick figures holding hands, one tall and one small. The words read, Brave Daddy and Brave Lily. Where did you learn to spell brave? Mrs. Whitmore helped. She said, today you're going to do something brave, and I wanted you to remember I'm brave with you. Marcus folded the card carefully, tucked it in his jacket pocket, next to her good luck card from 2 weeks ago. Accumulated talismans of his daughter's faith. The boardroom on the 12th floor was designed to intimidate. Massive table, leather chairs. Windows overlooking the city from a height that made everything below seem small. 7 board members already seated when Marcus arrived. Whitfield at the head of the table, Harrington to his right looking like a man facing execution. Victoria Sutherland to his left with a lawyer Marcus didn't recognize. Whitfield called the meeting to order. Mr. Coleman, you've presented evidence of discriminatory hiring practices. The board has reviewed your preliminary findings. We'd like you to walk us through your analysis in detail. Marcus connected his laptop to the projector. The first slide showed the core statistic: 43 rejections over 6 years, 38 candidates of color, 31 single parents. Victoria's lawyer immediately interrupted. "Mr. Chairman, my client objects to this proceeding. Mr. Coleman has accessed confidential personnel files without proper authorization and contacted rejected candidates in violation of company policy." Whitfield's expression didn't change. Mr. Coleman was given CTO-level access by the CEO and asked to investigate security breaches. The files he accessed were within his authorization. "Continue, Mr. Coleman." Marcus walked them through the data methodically. Interview duration analysis showing the dramatic drop-off after family status mention. Demographic breakdown proving disparate impact. Coded language examples from Victoria's own interview notes. Testimony from 5 rejected candidates describing identical patterns. He projected interview notes side by side. White candidate with children. Strong family values demonstrate stability, good work-life balance, perspective. Black candidate with children. Commitment concerns due to family obligations, availability, questions, cultural fit issues. Same fact. Opposite framing, the bias rendered visible. Victoria's lawyer tried to interrupt 3 more times. Whitfield shut him down each time. "Let the man present his evidence. You'll have opportunity to respond." The presentation took 23 minutes. When Marcus finished, the room was silent. Board member Rebecca Aldridge, late 50s with steel gray hair, spoke first. "Ms. Sutherland, these are serious allegations with significant legal implications. What's your response?" Victoria stood composed, but Marcus could see tension in her shoulders. These hiring decisions were made in good faith based on legitimate business needs. The statistical analysis ignores context and individual circumstances. Many factors go into hiring decisions beyond what can be captured in a spreadsheet. Can you explain why interview duration drops by an average of 35 minutes after candidates of color mention family obligations? Each interview is different. Some candidates simply weren't qualified. Marcus produces audio recordings. "I have permission from 3 candidates to play excerpts from their interviews. Ohio is a single-party consent state for recording." Victoria's expression flickered. "You can't." The recordings played, professional conversations turning cold the moment family status emerged. Victoria's voice asking leading questions about commitment and availability. Candidates trying to reassure Victoria, responding with barely concealed skepticism. The bias audible in tone and word choice. The last recording was Terrell Hayes Donovan's brother. Clear, articulate, answering technical questions with expertise. Then Victoria asking about his personal life. Terrell mentioning his children. Victoria's voice shifting. "I appreciate your honesty, but we need someone who can be fully committed without distractions. Someone whose focus isn't divided." The recording ended. Donovan stood up from where he'd been sitting in the back of the room. "That's my brother, MIT Computer Science 3.9 GPA. Victoria rejected him in 8 minutes. He's now a senior engineer at Google making $185,000. TechFlow lost him because of this policy." Victoria's lawyer stepped forward. "This is an ambush. We weren't told there would be recordings or surprise witnesses." Whitfield's voice cut through the objections. "Ms. Sutherland, I need a direct answer. Did you systematically reject qualified candidates based on race and family status?" Victoria's composure cracked. "My ex-husband was a single father. He told me his children came first, that work came second. Then he left for a position in Seattle and I never saw him again. I've spent 16 years trying to protect this company from employees who can't fully commit. If that's discrimination, then discrimination is what good business requires." The silence that followed was absolute. Victoria seemed to realize what she'd just admitted. Her lawyer grabbed her arm, tried to get her to sit down, but it was too late. Board member Jonathan Sterling, mid-40s investment banker, spoke carefully. "Miss Sutherland, you just acknowledged implementing hiring policies based on personal bias against single parents. Not bias, experience, practical evaluation of commitment risk." Aldridge cut in. "Commitment risk evaluated differently based on race. That's textbook disparate impact discrimination. We could be looking at class action liability." Harrington finally spoke, his voice hollow. "Victoria, I think you should take administrative leave pending a full investigation." "Administrative leave," Victoria's voice rose. "I've given this company 16 years. I've built HR policies that protected us from bad hires. And you're going to throw me aside because one disgruntled employee manufactures a discrimination case." Whitfield stood. "Ms. Sutherland, you're terminated effective immediately. Security will escort you from the building. You'll receive 2 weeks severance. Our legal team will be in contact regarding potential liability. Victoria stared at him. You can't do this. I'm the lead board member and primary investor. I absolutely can. Whitfield's tone was final. This company will not tolerate systematic discrimination regardless of how long someone has been employed or what justifications they offer. Victoria looked around the room like she was searching for allies. Found none. Her lawyer was already packing his briefcase, clearly unwilling to be associated with her admission. She walked out without another word, two security guards appearing to escort her. When the door closed, Harrington turned to Marcus. His expression was complicated. You just cost this company 16 years of institutional knowledge and potentially exposed us to massive legal liability. Whitfield responded before Marcus could. James, he documented discrimination that was happening under your watch. You should be thanking him for giving us a chance to fix it before a federal lawsuit did it for us. Harrington's jaw worked, but he didn't argue. The board discussed next steps. Full audit of hiring practices over the past decade. Compensation fund for rejected candidates. Policy changes to prevent future discrimination. Independent oversight of HR for the next 3 years. Through it all, Marcus sat quietly waiting to learn if he still had a job. Whitfield finally addressed him directly. Mr. Coleman, on behalf of the board, thank you for bringing this to our attention. I know it required considerable personal risk. Marcus nodded, unsure what to say. We'll be reaching out to the 43 affected candidates with formal apologies and financial compensation. Those interested in reconsidering employment will receive priority interviews with new HR leadership. Sterling added, we're also implementing the policy changes you outlined. Blind resume review, structured interview scoring, diverse panel requirements. You've probably saved this company from a federal consent decree. Aldridge looked at Harrington. James, I think we need to discuss CTO succession planning. Peter Drummond has been phoning it in for years. Maybe it's time for fresh leadership. Marcus saw where this was going, tried to head it off. I've been here 2 weeks. I'm not qualified to be CTO. Whitfield smiled. 2 weeks ago, you fixed a crisis 50 consultants couldn't solve. Today, you documented systematic discrimination and forced this company to address it. You're exactly the kind of leader we need. The board voted. Drummond would be moved to advisory role. Marcus would assume CTO responsibilities after a 6-week transition period. The salary increase was substantial enough to make his eyes widen. After the meeting ended and board members filtered out, Whitfield pulled Marcus aside. That took courage. Most people in your position would have kept their head down, taken the paycheck, ignored the problem. My daughter was called a liar for telling the truth about my job. I'm tired of watching people make assumptions based on race and family status. Whitfield nodded. My wife died 17 years ago. Breast cancer. I had a 6-year-old and a 9-year-old. The number of people who assumed I couldn't handle executive responsibility while raising kids alone was staggering. He paused. Change doesn't happen because people in power suddenly become enlightened. It happens because someone refused to accept the status quo. You refused. That matters. Marcus left the building at noon. Sent a text to Beatrice. All done. Heading home. Can you tell Lily everything went well? Her response came immediately. She's been asking every 20 minutes if you're okay. Come home. We're making celebration dinner. The drive back felt surreal. 2 weeks ago, he'd been unemployed with $67 in the bank. Now he was CTO designate of a major tech company, had exposed systematic discrimination, had forced accountability, had bet everything on the truth mattering, and somehow won. Lily met him at the door, threw herself into his arms with the full force of 7-year-old relief. Mrs. Whitmore said you were brave today, that you did the right thing even though it was scary. Marcus carried her inside, sat on the couch with her in his lap. Remember when you told Mrs. Hawthorne the truth even though she didn't believe you? Yeah. Today I told the truth about something bigger, and it was scary, but you taught me that brave means doing it anyway. Did they believe you eventually? After I showed them proof, good. Lily leaned against his chest. Daddy, I made you another card. The card showed a figure in a cape standing in front of a tall building. The sun overhead had a smiley face. The words read, my daddy fixes everything even when it's hard. Marcus held his daughter in the card and felt the weight of what he'd set in motion. Victoria was gone, but her bias had shaped the company for 16 years. 43 families deserve more than apologies. The systems that enabled discrimination ran deeper than one HR director. But today, for the first time in 6 months, Marcus believed change was possible, believed that refusing to accept injustice could actually matter. His daughter believed he could fix anything. Maybe with enough courage and enough truth, that belief wasn't as naive as it seemed. Outside, the November sun was setting, casting long shadows through the apartment windows. Tomorrow would bring new challenges: implementing policy changes, reaching out to rejected candidates, managing the political fallout of Victoria's termination, learning to be CTO. But tonight there was just a father and daughter celebrating a victory that meant more than employment or salary or title. Tonight they'd proven that truth could overcome bias, that courage could challenge power, that one person refusing to stay quiet could actually change something. Lily fell asleep against his chest. Marcus held her carefully, watched her breathe, and felt something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Hope, not as wishful thinking, but as earned certainty that tomorrow could actually be different than yesterday. The months following Victoria's termination moved with the momentum of things too long delayed. Marcus transitioned into the CTO role, through February learning to navigate executive politics while maintaining the technical clarity that had gotten him hired. Peter Drummond took his forced advisory position with visible resentment but minimal resistance, smart enough to recognize when battles were already lost. The compensation fund became Marcus's priority. Working with an independent mediator, TechFlow contacted all 43 rejected candidates. 28 responded. 17 accepted financial settlements averaging $8,000 each in formal apologies and the option to reapply. 5 were still unemployed. 3 were underemployed in positions below their qualifications. 9 had found good jobs elsewhere but appreciated the acknowledgement that their rejections had been unjust. Gerald Washington accepted a senior developer position in March. Walked into the office on his first day, shook Marcus's hand, and his voice cracked when he spoke. 3 years I thought something was wrong with me. Thought I wasn't good enough despite my qualifications. You proved it wasn't me. That's worth more than the settlement. Jamal Brooks declined the job offer but took the compensation. Sent Marcus an email that arrived late one night: I'm happy at my current company. But thank you for proving I wasn't crazy. Thank you for showing my daughter that when people treat you unfairly, fighting back is possible. Terrell Hayes, Donovan's brother, stayed at Google but used the settlement to fund coding bootcamp scholarships for single parents. Named it the Coleman Fund without asking permission. Marcus found out when a reporter called asking for comment on the first cohort of 20 students. The policy changes rolled out in April. Blind resume screening that stripped names and demographic markers. Structured interview protocols with standardized questions and scoring rubrics. Diverse panels required for all technical positions. Independent quarterly audits of hiring data. By May, TechFlow's candidate acceptance rate for people of color had risen from 42% to 78%. Single-parent hires increased from 11% to 31%. The numbers proved what Marcus had known all along: competence existed everywhere once you stopped filtering for comfort. The industry noticed. Forbes published a profile in June: How One Engineer Changed Tech Hiring Forever. The article traced Marcus's journey from rejected candidate to CTO who'd exposed systematic discrimination. Other companies in Cleveland began reviewing their own practices. Some voluntarily, others under pressure from employees who'd read the article and started asking uncomfortable questions. Lily turned 8 in July. The party was small, just her closest friends and Beatrice. But when she blew out her candles, Marcus saw something different in her expression. Not just childhood joy, but a kind of confidence that came from watching her father fight for what was right and win. She was learning that resistance wasn't futile but necessary. Mrs. Hawthorne had retired in June, citing health reasons. The school hired a younger teacher, a black woman named Jennifer Mills, who treated Lily and the other students of color with the kind of baseline respect that should have been standard but somehow wasn't. Small victories accumulating into something that might eventually resemble justice. The invitation to speak at the National Tech Leadership Conference arrived in August. Marcus almost declined. Public speaking wasn't his strength. But Whitfield called personally. You need to tell this story. There are thousands of engineers out there facing what you face, thinking they're the problem when the system is the problem. Give them hope. Show them change is possible. Lily found him practicing his speech one Saturday morning, climbed into his lap while he reviewed slides on his laptop. What's this for, Daddy? A conference where I talk to other people about making companies fairer. Like how you made TechFlow fairer. Exactly like that. Are you nervous? Very nervous. 3,000 people is a lot of people. Lily thought about this. Mrs. Mills says when you're nervous about doing something important, remember why it's important. Why is this important? Marcus pulled up a slide showing the demographic shift in TechFlow's hiring. Because 17 families have jobs now because we changed the rules. And if I tell that story well, maybe other companies will change their rules too. Maybe thousands of families. Lily studied the numbers like she understood what they meant. Then you should tell it really good. So lots of families get helped. The conference happened in San Francisco the second week of September, exactly 14 months after Marcus had been hired. He flew out alone, leaving Lily with Beatrice. The Moscone Center was massive, the kind of space designed to make individuals feel insignificant. He checked into his hotel room the night before his keynote, reviewed his speech for the 100th time, and barely slept. Morning arrived with the inevitability of consequences. Marcus put on his best suit, the one he'd bought with his first CTO paycheck, looked at himself in the hotel mirror, and saw someone he was still learning to recognize. Not the desperate man from 14 months ago, scrambling for any job that would have him. Someone who'd earned his place through competence and courage in roughly equal measure. The green room backstage held other speakers, people whose names he recognized from industry publications. A woman who'd founded 3 successful startups, a researcher from MIT working on quantum computing, a venture capitalist whose fund had backed companies worth billions. They made small talk that felt like evaluation, everyone measuring everyone else. The conference organizer found him 20 minutes before his slot. "You're trending on LinkedIn already. Word got out about your story. Expect a full room." Marcus's stomach tightened. How full? Every seat. 2,800 registered. We opened overflow viewing in 2 auxiliary halls. The stage was larger than he'd imagined, lights bright enough to turn the first 3 rows into silhouettes. Marcus walked to the podium while someone read his introduction credentials that sounded more impressive out loud than they felt living through them. The applause faded. 2,800 faces waiting. Marcus gripped the podium edges and began with the same words that had opened this story. 14 months ago, I sat in a parking lot with $67 in my bank account watching the company that just rejected me fall apart through floor-to-ceiling windows. I had a choice then: drive away with my dignity intact or walk back into a building where I'd just been told I wasn't good enough. He told the story chronologically. The 12 rejections that had preceded TechFlow. The interview that had gone well until family obligations came up. The dismissal wrapped in coded language about distractions and divided focus. The crisis observed from outside. The decision to help anyway despite having every reason to walk away. The system fixed in 3 minutes 42 seconds while 50 consultants watched. The job offer that changed everything. Then the harder part. Lily's experience at school, her teacher's assumptions, the realization that bias wasn't just about employment, but about how his daughter would be seen and treated her entire life. The investigation into Victoria's hiring practices that had started with checking security logs and ended with documenting 6 years of systematic discrimination. The numbers appeared on the screen behind him. 43 candidates rejected, an interview duration dropping from an average of 41 minutes to 6 minutes after family status was mentioned. Demographic breakdown showing 38 people of color affected. The coded language patterns that made discrimination look like business judgment. I didn't set out to expose anything. I was trying to keep my job. But when I saw the pattern, when I understood that 43 families had faced what I'd faced, staying quiet wasn't an option. He walked them through the board meeting confrontation. Victoria's admission that personal trauma had shaped 16 years of hiring decisions. The termination and policy changes, the compensation fund and rehiring initiative. The ripple effects spreading beyond one company as other organizations read about the case and examined their own practices. The statistics showing TechFlow's transformation appeared on screen. Hiring rates before and after. Retention improvements. Innovation metrics. The business case for inclusion rendered in data that couldn't be argued with. You can't fix what you won't acknowledge. For 6 years, TechFlow rejected qualified candidates because one person's bias became company policy. How many other companies have similar patterns they don't examine? How many talented people are we losing because we filter for comfort instead of competence? Marcus paused, looked out at the crowd. He could barely see past the lights. Change doesn't require perfection. It requires the courage to admit when systems are broken and the commitment to fix them even when it's uncomfortable. Every one of you has the power to examine your hiring practices, to question assumptions, to remove barriers that have nothing to do with competence. He thought of Lily's card from 14 months ago, the one about fixing anything. Thought about what he wanted these 2,800 technology leaders to understand. The question isn't whether your companies have bias. The question is what you're going to do about it once you see the evidence. Whether you'll have the courage to change systems that benefit from the status quo. Whether you'll prioritize fairness over institutional comfort. His voice steadied, carrying 14 months of hard-won certainty. I was rejected 12 times before TechFlow hired me. Told explicitly and implicitly that being a good father made me a bad employment risk. But I'm standing here now because one crisis forced one company to see past their assumptions. Because I refused to accept that my daughter's need for stability should disqualify me from using my skills. The screen behind him changed to show a photo he'd included at the last minute. Lily at her 8th birthday party, gap-toothed smile, holding a science project about volcanoes. Not identified by name, just a reminder that behind every statistic was a child watching how adults handled injustice. That's my daughter. She's 8 years old now. When this started, she was 7, and she believed her father could fix anything. I didn't want to prove her wrong, so I fixed what I could. One company's policies, 43 families' situations. Maybe through this story, your willingness to examine your own systems. Marcus gripped the podium, delivered his closing. You don't have to be perfect to make a difference. You just have to refuse to accept that broken systems are inevitable. One person documenting injustice can cascade into hundreds of small changes. Those changes can cascade into transformed industries. It starts with someone refusing to stay quiet when they see evidence of harm. His voice dropped intimate despite the massive room. 14 months ago, I was unemployed and desperate. Today, I'm CTO of a growing company. But that's not the victory. The victory is 17 families who have jobs they deserve. 43 people who got acknowledgement that their rejections were unjust. Thousands who've read this story and found courage to challenge discrimination in their own lives. He stepped back from the podium, finished. That's what we built. Not from perfection, but from one person's refusal to drive away from a parking lot. From the belief that competence and family aren't mutually exclusive. From the understanding that dignity matters more than institutional comfort. The silence lasted maybe 2 seconds, felt like forever. Then the room erupted. People on their feet, applause rolling like thunder. Not just recognition, but something larger. The possibility that systems could change. That one person's refusal could matter. That courage compounded into justice given enough time and determination. Marcus stood on the stage absorbing it, this moment he hadn't imagined 14 months ago when he'd been sitting in his car with a daughter's card and no idea how to provide for her. The standing ovation continued. 3 minutes. 4. People weren't just clapping, but nodding to each other, making eye contact, communicating something Marcus couldn't quite read from the stage but felt in the air. Agreement, commitment, the infectious nature of possibility. When it finally ended, Marcus walked off stage on shaking legs. The conference organizer grabbed his arm. That was incredible. We've already got 50 companies requesting your slides. The hashtag is trending nationally. Marcus nodded, not quite able to process. His phone was buzzing constantly. LinkedIn notifications piling up. Email inbox flooding. The story escaping his control, becoming something bigger than his personal vindication. Afterward came the deluge. People approaching in hallways wanting to share their own stories of discrimination. HR directors asking how to audit their practices. Single parents thanking him for making them feel seen. Journalists requesting interviews. One woman in her mid-30s waited until the crowd thinned before approaching. Her name tag read Evelyn Brooks. Mr. Coleman, I'm a single mother of twin boys. I was rejected from 9 positions in 8 months. After hearing your story, I applied to 3 companies last month. Told them up front about my family situation. 2 of them cited your TechFlow case when explaining their family support policies. I start at Vertex Technologies next week. Marcus shook her hand, felt the weight of what she was saying. I'm glad things worked out. You don't understand. Her voice was intense, certain. I was ready to give up on tech completely. Thought I was the problem. Your story showed me the system was broken, not me. That fighting for fair treatment was possible. You changed my life without knowing I existed. She walked away before Marcus could respond. Left him standing in the conference center corridor, understanding for the first time the full scope of what he'd set in motion. Not just 17 families at TechFlow, not just 43 candidates compensated, but thousands of people watching, learning that resistance was possible. The flight home that evening felt different than the flight out. Marcus spent it reading messages from people whose names he didn't recognize, but whose stories he understood completely. Each one a variation on the same theme. You showed me I wasn't alone. You proved the system could change. Thank you for fighting when it would have been easier to stay quiet. The plane descended toward Cleveland through September twilight. Below, the city spread out in patterns of light and shadow. Somewhere down there, Lily was probably already asleep, having waited as long as an 8-year-old could manage before exhaustion won. Beatrice would have tucked her in, read her an extra chapter as consolation for Daddy being gone. Marcus thought about the card Lily had made 14 months ago. Daddy can fix anything. She'd been right, though not in the way either of them had imagined. Not through perfect solutions or heroic interventions, but through refusing to accept that broken systems were inevitable. Through documenting harm and demanding accountability. Through the slow cascade of small changes compounding into transformation. The taxi from the airport took 40 minutes through familiar streets. Marcus watched Cleveland pass by the windows, this city where he'd been rejected 12 times, where he'd nearly lost everything, where he'd somehow managed to build something that mattered from the wreckage of desperation. His apartment building looked the same as always. Same cracked pavement in the parking lot, same faded paint on the exterior. But Marcus could afford to stay here now. Could afford better if he wanted, but this place held memories of survival that felt worth keeping. Mrs. Whitmore's light was still on. She opened her door before Marcus reached his own. "How did it go?" Standing ovation. 3 minutes long, Beatrice's eyes filled. "Oh, Marcus, I knew they'd see what we see. Is Lily asleep since 8:30? But she left something for you on your desk. Made it this afternoon while I was helping with homework." Inside the apartment, Marcus found the card immediately. Construction paper and markers. Lily's evolving artistic skills on display. The drawing showed a stick figure on a stage with hundreds of smaller figures watching. The sun overhead was enormous, taking up half the sky. The words in her careful second-grade handwriting, "My daddy changed the world." Marcus sat at his desk holding this piece of paper, feeling the weight of his daughter's beliefs settling over him like a mantle. She thought he'd changed the world. In reality, he'd changed one company's policies, helped 43 families, inspired maybe a few thousand people through a conference speech. But maybe that was enough. Maybe world-changing didn't require fixing everything everywhere. Maybe it just meant refusing to accept injustice in your corner and trusting that others would do the same in theirs. Enough corners changed, and eventually the whole structure transformed. He pulled out his phone, looked at the messages still accumulating. Requests for consulting, speaking invitations, interview proposals. People wanting pieces of the story, wanting to attach themselves to the narrative of redemption and justice. Marcus deleted most of them, kept a few that seemed genuinely interested in systemic change rather than individual celebrity. This wasn't about becoming some spokesperson for diversity. It was about doing his job as CTO while making sure the changes stuck at TechFlow and sharing what he'd learned with anyone who asked. The DOJ email caught his attention. Official letterhead sent 6 hours ago while he'd been in the air. He opened it carefully. "Mr. Coleman, the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division is announcing new guidance on employment discrimination in the technology sector. Your documentation of disparate impact and coded language patterns at TechFlow Solutions provided a template for identifying systematic bias. We've used your methodology to investigate complaints across 12 states and found similar patterns at 47 companies. Enclosed, please find preliminary results and our appreciation for your contribution to civil rights enforcement." Marcus read it twice. 47 companies, 12 states. His refusal to stay quiet about one company's bias had cascaded into federal investigation of systematic discrimination across an entire industry. He thought about all those families, all those qualified people who'd been rejected for reasons that had nothing to do with competence. How many would get acknowledgement now? How many policies would change because federal investigators had a framework for identifying what Marcus had documented at TechFlow? The number was too large to comprehend. So he focused on what he could measure. 17 families hired at TechFlow, 43 compensated and acknowledged, thousands inspired by a story that proved resistance worked, 47 companies under federal investigation, ripples spreading outward from one man's decision to walk back into a building that had rejected him. Marcus checked on Lily, found her sleeping peacefully with her stuffed rabbit clutched to her chest, kissed her forehead gently, careful not to wake her. Tomorrow he'd tell her about the speech, about the people who'd stood and applauded, about the woman who'd thanked him for changing her life. But tonight he just watched her breathe, this small person whose absolute faith had been the foundation for everything that followed. She'd believed her daddy could fix anything. And in trying to live up to that belief, he'd accidentally proven that one person refusing to accept injustice could cascade into something larger than individual redemption. Back in his living room, Marcus sat in the dark city lights filtering through the windows. 14 months ago, he'd been desperate and defeated, sitting in this same apartment, wondering how to tell his daughter they might lose their home. Now he was CTO of a growing company, had exposed systematic discrimination, had helped change an industry's hiring practices, had inspired thousands of people to challenge bias in their own contexts. The transformation felt surreal, not because of the career trajectory or the recognition, but because none of it had been planned. He'd just been trying to survive, to provide for Lily, to keep believing that competence mattered more than bias. Every step had been reaction rather than strategy, necessity rather than ambition. And somehow those desperate reactions had cascaded into systemic change. His phone buzzed one more time. Text from Whitfield. Watch the live stream. You represented TechFlow and the cause of justice brilliantly. The board is unanimous in our support. Take Monday off. Spend it with your daughter. You've earned it. Marcus smiled in the darkness. Monday off. He'd take Lily to the science museum she'd been asking about. Let her ask 1,000 questions about volcanoes and planets and how things worked. Be present with her in a way he hadn't been able to afford when every moment was consumed by survival anxiety. That was the real victory, he thought. Not the title or the salary or the recognition, but the ability to be fully present as a father without the constant terror of financial collapse. The freedom to focus on Lily's development without sacrificing his career or his dignity. The proof that being good at his job and good at being a dad weren't mutually exclusive categories. Outside his window, Cleveland slept under clear September sky. Inside, Marcus Coleman sat with his daughter's card and 14 months of hard-won certainty that courage, compounded that one person's refusal could cascade into thousands of small victories that the world his daughter would inherit, was incrementally more just because he'd refused to drive away from a parking lot when every reasonable instinct said he should. The phone buzzed once more. Email with the subject line. Thank you from Portland, Mr. Coleman. You don't know me, but I wanted you to know your story reached Oregon. I'm a single father who was rejected from 6 positions last year. Read about your case applied to a company that had just implemented policies based on your framework. I start next week. My daughter will have the stability she needs. You gave us hope when we were running out. Thank you for refusing to accept that being a good father makes us less valuable. Thank you for proving that fighting back works. Marcus read the email twice, added it to the folder containing hundreds of similar messages, testimonials from strangers whose lives had been touched by ripples spreading from one man's determination. He thought about responding, decided the message didn't need a response beyond continuing the work, beyond making sure the changes stuck, beyond being the kind of leader who remembered that behind every policy and metric were families who deserved dignity. Tomorrow he'd go back to being CTO, would handle the technical challenges and political complications of running a major department, would push for continued progress on inclusion while managing the resistance that always accompanied change, would live up to the responsibility that came with being someone whose story traveled farther than he could measure. But tonight he was just a father whose daughter believed he could fix anything, who tried his best to prove her right, who'd discovered that sometimes fixing things just meant refusing to accept they were broken beyond repair. Marcus stood, turned off the living room light, checked Lily one final time. She'd shifted in her sleep. Rabbit abandoned one small hand curled into a fist like she was holding on to something precious even in dreams. He pulled her blanket up, tucked it around her shoulders, whispered words she couldn't hear, but he needed to say. We did it, baby girl. We really did it. In the morning, he'd tell her about the speech, about the standing ovation, about the woman from Portland and the 47 companies under investigation and all the ways one person's refusal had cascaded into change. But the most important thing he'd tell her was simpler, that she'd been right all along. Her daddy could fix things. Not everything, not perfectly, but enough. In their corner of the world, they'd proven that courage mattered, that resistance worked, that one family's determination could help hundreds of others find their own strength. And sometimes that was all the world-changing anyone needed to do.